The Board of Zoning Adjustment. I'm Chris German. I ask the other members of the board and city parish staff to please introduce yourselves at this time, starting on my right.
Chelsea LeBlanc, board member.
Melissa Llewellyn, board member.
Alan Dennison, board member.
Sorry, we're learning the mic system. Mary Slyman, I'm the Director of Development and Planning.
Neil LaBeouf, I'm the Development Manager, Development and Planning.
Planner, development.
The meeting will be conducted as follows. For each case tonight, the staff will make a presentation. After the staff presentation, the applicant will speak. After questions and comments by the board, other proponents and all opponents may address the board. The applicant will then be allowed to speak again to address any comments made by other speakers. Following all input, the board will take action on the agenda item in question. We encourage your participation. If you wish to speak on any agenda item, fill out a speaker's card and give it to a staff member. The cards are available just outside the door. When your name is called, please come to the podium. During the public comment period, all comments will be limited to 3 minutes. Please do not applaud or show any other sign of agreement or disagreement with any part of these proceedings. If you haven't done so, I ask you to silence or turn off any cell phones or electronic devices now. This meeting is being recorded. Our first order of business is the approval of minutes from the regular meeting of March 11th, 2021.
Move to approve.
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Pennison with a second by Ms. Llewellyn to approve the minutes as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Minutes are approved. Our first case tonight is case number BOZ 2021-0009. It'll be presented by Ms. Lacombe.
BOZ 2021-0009 is the applicant's Dexter East. He is representing Infinity College at the 2600 block of Louisiana Avenue. They are asking for a variance of the parking requirements in a PI, Public Institutional Zoning District, located within the Louisiana Overlay District. This is a vicinity map showing the subject property on the eastern side of Louisiana Avenue, located between East Alexander Street and East Willow Street. I dropped a full site plan in this aerial map to represent the future parcel that it will be. It has not received final plat yet, still in preliminary status. But simultaneously, you can go through a platting process and the commercial review process. So this kind of shows where it's the southeastern portion of an 8-acre lot. This is a zoning map showing that it is in a PI zoning district with adjacent properties being RS1 and MN1. And this is the Louisiana overlay map. This deems important in the commercial review process because whenever a planner reviews for the LDC, they also need to incorporate a Louisiana overlay review past the LDC review. In the review process, this is the like I said, the full site plan. Whenever another commercial review, this is phase 1 of this development, and whenever another commercial review comes through for this phase, it will be important to incorporate, like I said, the Louisiana overlay regulations. The parking regulations for the overlay district encourages shared parking as well as a minimal parking in the street frontage. They encourage side and rear parking, which this shows. Ms. Davis is the owner of Infinity College, and she currently has a facility where she has learned from experience that she needs a little more parking than what we are allowing them. The LDC has a minimum requirement of 60 parking spaces, and they're allowed 20 over, so in between 60 and 80 parking places, they are proposing 93. So this variance request is for 13 additional parking spaces. This is a closer up of the site plan, just kind of gives you an idea of what they're proposing. The Louisiana overlay only allows 30% of their required parking to be in the frontage, which totals 18 parking places. They're only proposing 10. So they are showing good faith by doing the majority of the parking on the side and the rear. And you can see by the stub outs on the left side and the north side of this picture that they intend to move forward with some kind of shared parking in the future. That's pretty much it. This is a couple pictures of the site currently. They are in the beginning stages of development and looking to just add that little extra or maximize the lot that they're on with those 13 additional spaces. I know one of the reasons that she is asking for the variance is because of her current facility and the parking situation there. So she's looking to prevent vehicles from parking in the green space at her new facility. And that pretty much sums it up. Do you have any questions?
Is that why there was a delay between the original permit and the current request? Was it that it was an afterthought, or?
It was an afterthought. They submitted with an updated site plan. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
And they are meeting all the green space requirements for the lot, right?
They are meeting every other requirement LDC and Louisiana overlay
Great.
requires.
Okay. Any other questions for staff? Thank you.
Yes, sir.
We'll now hear from the applicant.
The only thing I'd like to add,
Come up to the mic and please state your name and address for the record.
all right. Hi, my name is Dexter East, address 5721 Percy Road, Kaplan, 70548. Appreciate y'all hearing us. The only thing I'd like to add is we don't just meet the requirements of UDC for the green space and landscaping. We well exceed it. And we did throw some additional pavilion and some other structures in there. And kind of the layout, the layout itself lended itself for these additional spaces. If you see, it's nice and symmetric and good flow, so appreciate you hearing us.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? Okay. Do we have any other speaker cards?
The first speaker was Mr. East, and I also have Dr. Davis.
I'll withdraw my request to speak.
Okay. All right. No other comments from the public? I'll entertain comments from the board or a motion.
I make a motion to approve the variance as recommended by the staff.
All right. I have a motion from Mr. Pennison to approve the variance as recommended by staff. Do I have a second? Okay. And I have a second from Ms. LeBlanc. All right. Motion is to approve the variance as recommended by staff. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. The variance is approved. All right, before we do the next case, I'd like our tardy board member to introduce himself. Press the button.
Mark DeCluett, board member.
All right, our next case is BOZ 2021-0010, and Ms. LeBlanc will be presenting for staff.
Welcome. BOZ 2021-0010 is Mr. David K. Stinson. He resides at 101 McCord Drive, and he is asking for a variance of the setback regulations for a detached accessory building in a RS1 residential single-family zoning district. This is a vicinity map of the subject property. You can see it is located on the south side of Kali Saloom Road, kind of directly south of the intersection Ambassador Caffrey and Kali Saloom. This is an aerial of the subject property. You can see right here, I'm pointing the pointer, that existing building, the existing structure that is there currently is encroaching into the rear setback quite a bit. I don't know if there's any room at all in between the property line and that structure. So moving forward, he would like to get rid of that structure to replace it. This is a zoning map which shows the subject property located in a RS1 zoning district with adjacent properties also in RS1. And this is a site plan of the proposed new detached accessory building. You can see it is a in-lot with street frontages on all three sides, being the front McCord Drive, East Peck Boulevard on the left, and, I can't see that, Bonner Drive on the right. The rear setback is a required 10 feet, and he is asking for the proposed 5 feet 1 inch. This is a more detailed drawing of the proposed structure. You can see he is fitting or proposing it to be architecturally compatible with his home. It is hardy plank board, and the roof lines tend to be the same as the house. This is a picture of the existing house. This gives you a shot from East Peck where you would drive into the driveway, and you can see the proposed structure would be directly ahead of you, where they would drive straight into the structure. This is a shot from the opposite side of the house where you can see the rear of the structure where it would be. It would line up with the roof line of the existing home. Mr. Stinson had a couple hurdles to jump with his. He was located, there was a pipeline easement in his backyard where he reached out to the pipeline company and did receive a partial release of the right-of-way. That was a condition on my staff report, so he's already taken care of that condition. He's gotten that notarized and recorded at the courthouse. As you guys are aware, there is an allowance for one detached accessory structure to encroach into the rear setback, but his proposed building exceeds that by 270 square feet. So that's why he's needing the variance tonight. We don't believe that the detached garage will adversely affect the adjacent property owner, especially being that it is a lesser encroachment than the existing structure that is to be replaced. Staff is in support of the variance for the rear setback from 10 feet required to the 5 feet 1 inch proposed.
All right. Any other questions for staff?
The existing structure, is that a condition of permit for the demolition?
It's located in the same area space that his new structure is going to be. We didn't think it was necessary to make it a condition.
Yeah.
You can see on this site plan right here, the align edge to the existing house is exactly where this building right here is. You can see the roof line is lined up with that storage structure.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you. We'll hear from the applicant. Please come to the podium and give us your name and address.
David Stinson, 101 McCord Drive. I really don't have anything else to say. She covered it pretty well, but
Any questions for the applicant? All right. Thank you, Mr. Stinson.
thank you.
Any public comments?
The only speaker card we had was Mr. Stinson.
Okay. All right. No more public comments. I will turn it over to the board for a comments or a motion.
I make a motion to approve with the recommended conditions.
Second.
All right. I have a motion from Ms. LeBlanc, seconded by Mr. Pennison, to approve the variance with the stated conditions from staff. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Variance is approved. All right. Our third case tonight is BOZ 2021-0011. Again, Ms. Lacombe will present.
BOZ 2021-0011 is a variance request from Acadiana Cares located at 809 Martin Luther King Jr. Drive. This variance is of the sign regulations in a RM1 residential mixed zoning district. This is a vicinity map of the subject property. It is located on the north side of Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, between North St. Antoinette Street and the northeast Evangeline Thruway. This is a aerial of the entire property where you can see the very southern portion of this picture is the proposed sign location. This is a zoning map illustrating that it is in a RM1 zoning district. And this is a mock-up of the proposed sign. You can see it has an overall height of 10 feet, and the sign area is 48.5 square feet for this proposed sign. In an RM1 zoning district, the way that the sign ordinance is written, it specifically states the following signs are allowed, and it does not have any mention of a reader board being part of the allowance in signs. Every other zoning district spoken about in the LDC does specifically speak on the allowance of reader boards, whether it is allowed or not. They do meet all requirements other than that, but because it is not mentioned as an approved sign, a reader board in an RM1 zoning district, they are asking for their variance. This is another mock-up of what the sign would look like located at that location. And this is the site plan they submitted. It was very small, so I kind of blew up the little circled area, put it to the right side of the page where you can see it's going to be located 10 feet back from the property line. It will be located outside of any utility easement or any, there would be no site issues. This is a picture of the location of the sign. It would be on the left side of that drive going into the facility. This is standing at the road facing east to kind of give you an idea of what the rest of the street looks like. And this is standing at the road facing west. We don't believe that it would cause any visual clutter. We don't think it would seem out of place for this particular location. I did add this aerial in the PowerPoint to show how much multifamily is across the street. There is a residential single-family home to the left of this entrance, and to the right is another apartment complex. Across the street is also multifamily housing. It kind of fits in with the area. The purpose of the sign is to be inclusive with the community and let them know of all the current services offered, a lot of COVID vaccination type information, and any kind of upcoming events for this facility. Staff is in support of the variance to allow the proposed reader board in this RM1 zoning district.
Any questions for staff? All right. We'll hear from the applicant.
My name is Doug Orgeron. I'm a 3D International Sign Company. I'm representing Acadiana Cares, and of course, my company, 3D International. And that April said everything that I could possibly say. So I think that it warrants I think they need the signage as far as being able to advertise things that they do there. So especially being a medical facility, you know. So okay, thank y'all.
Thank you. Do we have any other speaker cards?
So the first speaker card was for Mr. Orgeron, who did come up. The second card is for Sheely Barber, who is against but did not indicate whether they wish to speak. So Sheely Barber, do not wish to speak, okay. She is against.
Okay. All right, with no other public comment, I'll close that and we will go to board comments or motion.
I'd like to make a motion to approve, as recommended by staff.
Second.
I have a motion to approve by Mr. Pennison, seconded by Mr. DeCluett to approve the variance as recommended by staff. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. None opposed. Your variance is approved. All right. Our last case for tonight is BOZ 2021-0012. This case will be slightly different as it is an appeal of an administrator's decision versus a variance. The first person that we'll hear from tonight will be the appellant. They'll be given 30 minutes to provide their appeal. Then we'll hear from the director or their representative. They'll be given 30 minutes, and then we will hear from the property owner involved. They will also be given 30 minutes. After that point, we will open it for public comment. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes each. Please stay on task and on subject. We'll try not to be rude, but we have a lot of people here, and we have a lot of people that want to speak, and I want to hear from everybody, but we need to stay on what we are discussing, which is an appeal of the administrator's decision. So, all right. If I can have the appellant. Yep.
May we ask a question as far as this 30-minute allotment for the appellant? I'm a co-appellant with him. Can we each take a little bit of this 30 minutes?
Yes, you can split up your 30 minutes as you see fit. And then if there's others that want to talk, they can go to the public comment section. So.
Process after public comment, I think you will allow the appellants an opportunity to make
Correct.
any final comments that
Correct.
were.
Yeah, correct. So after all comments, the appellant will be able to come back up and address any comments from LCG or from the public. And then at that point, we will close the comment section and go to board action. All right, so please give me your name and address, please.
My name is Colby Longlinay. I live at 316 Myrtle Place, Lafayette, 70506.
And my name is Gordon Sheffler. I live at 100 Oleander Street.
Please begin.
Sure. My name is Colby Longlinay. I live with my wife and 2 small children at 316 Myrtle Place. I'm the original appellant of Director Sliman's decision back in November. I, along with 40 additional appellants, come to you tonight ask you to stop allowing STRs in zoning section RS1. Before we get to the appeal, let's talk about neighbors. Mine are behind me tonight. Some as appellants, others as friends. They grab your packages for you while you're on vacation. They might borrow milk or eggs or even sugar. They may feed your cat or dog. They probably keep an eye on your home, as you would do for them. Let me give you a little idea of mine. The occupancy rate of the STR next to me is said to be a mere 36%. That's a number given by the owner of it. If you use that number times 365 days in a year, that's 131.4 days. If you use 3 guests per night, per 131.4 days per year, times the 3.5 years this has been operating, I've got 1,400 transient neighbors. I don't trust these people. They don't live next to me. I don't know their names. They don't know my name. I see them come and go multiple times a day, multiple times a month, multiple times a year, multiple times over and over and over again. I'm not sure if any of you or all of you are well versed in our case, but I'm also a part of the original STR complaint filed at the end of 2019. We filed 2 subsequent complaints in the following months before being heard by the P&Z board, the city council, and we were supposed to have another Boza hearing that never actually happened. It was deferred. We absolutely feel slighted in the director's decision, as we were the initial complainants and were given 0 notice of this letter until long after it was written. Are you guys all familiar with the appeal packet that we turned in?
Yes.
Okay. So we'll just start there.
My I don't mean to
Go ahead.
interrupt. We have a copy. We'd like to offer file, introduce it into the record. Can we?
Thank you.
So as you all know, the appellants submit this appeal under the provision LDC 89-68A2 and/or under the former UDC provision numbered identically, all asserting that they have been adversely impacted by the Development and Planning Director's November 10th decision to authorize continued operation of a short-term rental in our neighborhood located at 105 Poinsettia. Several of the appellants own a property immediately adjacent to the short-term rental and/or within the 200-foot radius designated by the LDC/UDC 89-68D and have been adversely impacted by the ongoing operation of the short-term rental. Other appellants live and own property in the same neighborhood and surrounding areas and fear that the director's decision will set a precedent authorizing short-term rentals as a permitted use in the rest of the neighborhood and the city of Lafayette at large. Appellants received no notice whatsoever that the director had made this determination. Thus, this appeal is submitted as timely as possible under the circumstances given. So basically, we base our appeal on this. Director Slyman's determination at issue was based on an erroneous interpretation of the LDC as the code is written. Short-term rentals are not a permitted use in RS1 zoned area under the LDC, and the director's determination otherwise, without notice to anyone affected, was based as such. They don't meet the definition of a single-family residence. The area in which we reside is RS1, where the LDC and UDC designates predominantly detached single-family neighborhoods. Within RS1, dwellings, single-family detached, are permitted, defining same as a detached building designed for residence for one family. Dwelling is further defined as a building or individual units within a mixed-use building designed for or used exclusively for residential purposes. A dwelling includes any use designated as a residence in the use table. A family is defined as one or more persons who are related by blood, marriage, civil union, adoption, or foster care living together or occupying a single housekeeping unit, or a group of not more than 4 single persons living together by joining agreement or occupying a single housekeeping unit on a non-profit cost-sharing basis. Domestic servants residing on the premises shall be considered part of your family. The subject property doesn't fit the definition of a dwelling, single-family detached, due to the transient nature of the short-term rental. Moreover, no family actually resides on the property. The LDC does not define the word residence, but the Merriam-Webster's dictionary offers a simple definition as the place where one actually lives as distinguished from one's domicile or a place for temporary sojourn. Accordingly, there is no scenario in which a short-term rental meets the definition of any acceptable use within RS1, or which the use of the subject property as a short-term rental somehow fits the definition of a dwelling of a single-family detached residence. As such, the director's determination was clearly erroneous.
Okay. You finished?
I can continue if you want me to.
No, I'll take over. Before I start, I'd like to offer finally introduce, we also have a group of our neighbors and citizens from around that couldn't make it here tonight. They submitted emails and whatnot. As I said earlier, my name is Gordon Sheffler. I live at 100 Oleander, and I'm one of the neighbors, one of the appellants that lives immediately adjacent to the property at issue here tonight. My understanding of the purpose of this board is this, that you guys are here to decide on what the law of our city says about this issue tonight. So we got to put emotions aside. Very difficult for me to do that because the decision that you guys make tonight is going to have very profound impacts on my family, my children, my home, and my neighborhood. We're not here to talk about what we can do, what we should do, what needs to be done to regulate these things. We're here to talk about what the law says tonight and what it said when this thing opened back in 2017. As Mr. Longleday said, we live in an RS1 zoned area. He went through all the definitions there. It's really clear. A short-term rental is not going to meet the definition of a single-family residence within, which are allowed in that zone. I brought with me a copy of the use table from our LDC. You can go through it with a fine-tooth comb. You're not going to find short-term rentals as a permissible use within an RS1 zone neighborhood. I'm watching you guys with these previous variance applications, and y'all are holding things to the letter of the law on where people can put a building. This is very significant to us in as much as this use is now being allowed by the director's decision. I don't know if you guys have copies of it, but I do have a copy. I'm happy to file it of record as well, the use table. So I'll offer file and introduce that. Mr. Longley did not address one definition that is in our code. That's the definition of commercial activity. I'll read it for you. Any business, trade, industry, or other activity engaged in for profit. Lists among some of those examples, lodging, short-term rentals or lodging. There's no getting around it. It is an internet motel that has popped up next door to my home without notice to me, without any regard for how it's affected my family. As such, there's only a certain amount of commercial uses that are permissible in RS1. Generally, it's in the nature of a backyard nursery and stuff like that. I will admit bed and breakfasts are admissible in RS1s, but they're a tightly restrained, tightly regulated thing, and they're under a conditional use permit process. Airbnbs, short-term rentals don't go through any of this. And under Director Slyman's decision, they don't have to. And that's a scary thing to me because not only do I have one in my backyard, I now have a second one that's popped up on the other fence line. So I'm literally surrounded by these things. And it's become a growing problem for this community. One thing that I've noticed in the year and a half that we've been fighting this thing is that people always say, well, what's the difference between this, short-term rentals and long-term rentals? I mean, if we shut down short-term rentals, we got to shut down all these long-term rentals. There's a fine difference between the two. Long-term renter moves in, they bring their furniture in the house, they cut the grass, they get the mail at the house, they live there and become a part of the neighborhood. They become your neighbors. You may not like them, but they're there every night, and they're there. And anyhow, apologies, I'm a little emotional about all of this, guys. All said, though, at the end of the day, they are your neighbors, and the most important thing for you guys to realize tonight is that a long-term rental meets the definition of a single-family residence, whereas a short-term rental can never meet that definition. If the numbers Mr. Longley gave you are right, that's 1,400 people that have come and gone from my backyard in the past 3.5 years. The authorization that Ms. Slyman gave back in November of 2020 was a complete about-face from the previous director's decision back in February of 2020, where they issued an abatement notice to the short-term rental next door to my home. So we don't know what happened in the time frame from February to November, but whatever happened, happened without notice to one of us, particularly us, the complainants that originally brought the complaints in the first place. You guys also have a duty to protect all of our constitutional rights as citizens of this city. It's spelled out in the LDC. I'm sorry, they changed the name on me. If you read what Ms. Slyman says, her reasoning for allowing this, I'll read it to you. Although not listed as a permitted use in RS zoning districts, short-term rentals are not expressly prohibited as they are undefined and unregulated by the UDC. Think of the Pandora's box that has just been opened with this thinking. It's a complete rejection of the way that our zoning codes work in this state, in this country. Zoning codes are permissive by nature. What that means is, unless we say you can do it, you can't do it. Matter of fact, the language from our own code, I'll read it for you. No building or land shall be used, and no building or part shall be erected, reconstructed, converted, moved, or structurally altered unless they conform to all applicable regulations in this chapter. It's no different than any other code in this country. State law, Louisiana courts, I'll quote Fourth Circuit from a case, says a zoning ordinance by its very nature sets forth the uses permitted and does not have to specifically exclude every non-permitted use. When you think of the absurd things that can happen when you allow something like this, look, it's a slippery slope. Because it's not prohibited, we're going to allow it. We cited some examples, some absurd examples in our appeal. Skeet shooting ranges, alligator farms, nudist colonies. None of that's expressly prohibited in our code. Under this rationale, though, from the director, it can pop up right next door to my home. If life is any indicator, real world is stranger than fiction can ever be. Here in Lafayette, for example, we have somebody that rents out an ambulance on Airbnb. Doesn't come with a carbon monoxide detector or anything. How does this qualify as a single-family residence? This lady downtown rents out a camper in her backyard. Think of the possibilities. People can pop up tents and rent these things out. It's just a few examples of what can happen when you have a government-sanctioned free-for-all, which is what this is. I'd like to address also a couple of myths. I've been seeing the media frenzy over this thing this week, and I'd like to address a few myths that I have observed about short-term rentals in our community. First off, I heard a myth that there's no police reports about what's taking place in my backyard. In my hand, I'm holding 8 individual police reports, most of them dealing with parking problems we had. One of them's dealing with a woman that was filming me and my family in my backyard. It's unbelievable that I have to sit here and we make police report after police report. We got no care. I'd like to offer, file, and introduce these into the record. And it's not just our house. There's another one down the street on Versailles. Got a police report on it. Suspicious person circumstances with a dead woman in it. A woman died in an Airbnb on Versailles Street. Elmhurst Park. That's a subdivision on this end of St. Landry from here. Our neighbors as well. They recently got invited introduced to the world of Airbnb with their first big block party 3 weeks ago. I'll read from the police reports there. Caller advised, people outside drinking, physical. Another caller advised a male, unknown description, had a bat or a stick. Another caller advised they have a big group of college students having partying and fighting outside. Calls from another caller advised it was about 60 people fighting. Said he saw one male laying on the ground bleeding. Another one advised they had all sorts of parking problems. First page of this makes a reference to a disturbance, fight in progress with weapons. This is the shady underbelly of short-term rentals in this town. And nobody that's going to get up here tonight in favor of these things is going to tell you about this stuff. I'd like to offer, file, and introduce this police report as well. Another myth I've heard repeated over and over again is the 300 Airbnbs in our community. I think what's happening is there's some deceptive marketing from Airbnb that's going on. You start looking through these things, and I had one that kept popping up over and over. I saw it. I was wondering why it kept popping up over and over again. Then I realized you can rent the bed, buy the bed in this place. It's got 4 individual beds you can rent. So dormitory style living, that's what we got. You know, how does that qualify as a single family residence? I'd like to offer, file, and introduce this. The other thing, back to my deceptive marketing practices of Airbnb. I know where the 300 number came from. You pull up, search Lafayette Airbnb, and it says 300-plus stays. Search Opelousas, 300-plus stays. Maurice, 300-plus stays. I don't think there's 300 houses in Maurice. Abbeville, 300-plus stays. New Iberia, 295 stays. Brobridge, 291. Dusson, 246. You look at these things, you start looking at them, and some houses pop up in every single city. What it is I think Airbnb blows out in the Acadiana region. So when you do a search in Lafayette and it says 300 homes, or 300 properties, it's really not that. Because you start digging through, and a good percent of them are from Brobridge, Grand Coteau, Orneville, all these places that this board has no jurisdiction over. Last thing is the myth of the safety of Airbnb. And I've heard it over and over again. Oh, we do background checks on these people. It's all safe and fun. You go look at what Airbnb says about their background checks. This is their 7-page disclaimer on their background checks. First thing that sticks out to me, and it should be obvious to anyone, is they're not doing background. They may background check the guy that rents the place, but the 5 or 6 guests that come with him, they don't background those people. How can they? So every time, yeah, you've checked the guy that put his credit card up, but you hadn't checked the 5 or 6 people that he shows up with, or the 5 or 6 people he meets downtown and brings back to the house, or the 60-plus people. You think they checked all the IDs of them at the block party in Elmhurst? I mean, there's no way that a single-family residence can qualify as short-term rental and vice versa. They are just not single-family residences, and they are not permitted by our existing code, and the director was wrong. If there's any questions for us, we'll be happy to field them.
I actually have one more thing to say. If this was such a, you're going to hear a lot of buzzwords and hype stuff tonight that, man, they're forward-thinking and they're progressive and we should just get on with it and everything else. But the code was just recently rewritten. Am I correct in that? There was a whole 30-person committee that was dedicated to rewriting it by the order of Mayor President Guillory. This wasn't added in. It wasn't in the UDC. It's now not in the carbon-copied version called the LDC. Was that on purpose, or was that because it doesn't need to be in there? I guess that's where I'm at. You guys have any insight on that?
No, we don't.
Okay.
Guys, thank you all. We appreciate your time tonight.
Okay. Hold on. If we have any questions from the board?
When did, it's a little convoluted in my understanding, when did you first receive notice that a previous decision had been overturned?
In January of this year.
In January of this year.
Yes, we were given it by the short-term rental owner's lawyer. That's how we learned about it.
Have you received any notice from the planning?
About this decision we're appealing tonight?
Yes.
No, sir.
Nothing in writing?
No, we did receive the notice about this hearing tonight.
We received the notice that the original Boza hearing that was supposed to happen about the abatement letter was deferred due to COVID, and then it was going to be rescheduled, and it was deferred again, and that was it. We never got anything else.
We were actually told we can't have this meeting before Boza because of COVID back last summer. And we were told, don't worry, just sit tight, we'll let you know when it's safe to come back. 6 months later, nothing. Then we find out that this happened, that we're appealing tonight. think this is a gross violation of our due process rights.
So when were you notified of the November 10th decision?
January. I think we got it on January the 28th. I immediately fired off a public records request to Ms. Slyman on it.
I have just one more question. In your Exhibit C, you note that the appellants are asserting that they have been adversely impacted by the director's decision. Obviously, we have letters of support for your position. Is there any documentation that you have that provides something more than a quality of life impact?
Like our police reports that I've submitted. We've also,
Value of property, infringement on property rights, et cetera.
no, with that has not happened yet, sir.
I just wanted to make sure. That's all the questions I have.
Any other questions from the board? I did have one question. In the LDC, part of your appeal is that because it's not listed, it's not allowed correctly. And when I read the 89-21, there's a section C that specifically says if a use is not defined in this section, the administrator may authorize the use if, one, the use is functionally the same as a listed use, or two, the use has similar visual, traffic, environmental, similar impacts as an expressly listed use. The administrator may refer to empirical studies or generally accepted planning or engineering sources. The burden is on the applicant to establish that the use is similar to the expressly listed use. Three, other comparably sized jurisdictions have successfully integrated the use in one or more equivalent zoning districts. And four, the use is within the same industry classification as another permitted use. In making this determination, the administrator may refer to NAICS classification stuff. And then it goes on to talk about if there's nothing for that. So,
Yes, sir. And, we addressed each of those points in the appeal. I'll say that. We have other appellants they're coming here tonight that are going to address each of those items one by one for you all. I'm happy to give it a stab myself right now, but you're going to hear from much more detailed responses from other folks on this. But we looked at New Orleans. New Orleans, as far as the other jurisdictions issue, that's the third one. New Orleans has a 60-page document that details the heavy regulation of short-term rentals in that area. Jefferson Parish has completely outlawed them, banned them in single-family zoned areas. Baton Rouge is in deadlock, much like our community is. Baton Rouge, just March of this year, an article from the Advocate, which you'll see a little later on. They're still in deadlock there. Mandeville and Abita Springs are ahead of the curve. They've actually got pretty solid ordinances in place on all that. But point being is this: any jurisdiction where this is, quote, successful, they're heavily regulated. That ain't what we have here in Lafayette. It is the Wild West, and I can attest to it. The NAICS code, we've got another gentleman that's going to talk about the NAICS codes. The other stuff, we've basically hit on those. You're going to hear from both of our wives on those, the first two prongs there. But these are a short-term rental. As we said, it's not even comparable to a single-family residence. It's not comparable to any other permitted use on the use table. The visual effects, the environmental impacts, all that stuff, they're a far cry from a single family that lives next door to you. Worst thing you get from that is a barking dog or something. So you're going to hear from other folks. We had divvied up the responsibilities tonight.
okay. Thank you. Any other questions? All right. We still have 9 minutes left for the appealant if you want one other person or somebody else to come up and talk. All right. Next, we will,
We do have one that'll take my wife, my lovely wife, Allison Sheffler.
all right, please come to the podium and we'll give you your last 9 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Allison Sheffler. That was my husband who did a great job up here, Gordon. I'm glad I have 9 minutes. My little girls were timing me for 3, so I'm appealing Director Slyman's decision to permit short-term rentals in residential neighborhoods. As a homeowner raising a family in a home adjacent to not 1 but 2 of these short-term internet motels, my family and I have been greatly affected by this. Mary Slyman's decision was made without any notice to anyone that would be affected by permitting such a use in our neighborhood, and I'm still very puzzled by this. Our government should be transparent when making decisions, especially decisions that change the playbook of rules affecting people's quality of life and their property values. We would have never invested in a home knowingly next door to a motel, better yet, 2 of them. We're living and raising children. We're not vacationing there. One reason she might have made this decision to authorize it was that she thought that short-term rentals have that same visual, traffic, environmental impacts as an expressly listed use. I read the code. They don't share these impacts. The revolving door of strangers from the internet is a far cry from a long-term tenant or a homeowner actually living on a property. The core problem with short-term rentals is that it's the dissolution of a neighborhood. The instant a home is turned over to transient renters, it is no longer a part of the neighborhood. Our homes are our investment, our sanctuary, our community in our neighborhood, and a neighborhood should be for neighbors. While we welcome visitors to our great city and all of the cultural, wonderful things we have, there are more hotels, motels, and legal bed and breakfasts than one can count. Drive down Kali Saloom and you can see for yourself. These businesses are regulated with proper fire safety, commercial trash dumpsters, parking lots, security measures. They pay commercial utility rates and taxes. There are plenty of commercial places available in Lafayette to operate businesses if one chooses to do so. And I know it's a business because Mary Slyman's letter told them it was okay to operate. You wouldn't tell a single family you can go home and operate. Our neighborhood has a permissive code that protects its residents from this sort of commercialization. If permission is not expressly granted, as my husband said, it is not an authorized use. Just because the internet has made it possible for people to convert homes to hotels, it doesn't mean that it should be done. This is unfair to the people living next door to them, and it's unfair to hotel, motel, and bed and breakfast owners that have had to follow rules and restrictions to open. We have very good friends who run a bed and breakfast, and they are furious. They're very tempted to convert to Airbnb because they would have no rules to follow whatsoever. These people, sorry. One of the 2 Airbnbs adjacent to my home is literally located on the property line with a window that looks into my yard. If someone wanted to build a home in my neighborhood, they would have to come and do what the gentleman did ahead of us. There would be setbacks and rules not allowing these structures literally on a neighbor's fence. It would be unheard of for a business not to have any building restrictions whatsoever. We're relying on you, the zoning board, to protect our venerable, historic neighborhood from these unregulated businesses. We're relying on you to protect our permissive code from being misinterpreted, to represent a free-for-all, and to stop allowing these short-term rental companies in our neighborhoods. And I appreciate your time.
I have one more.
My name is Jean Longlinay. My address is 316 Myrtle Place here in Lafayette, 70506.
And you're one of the listed appellants?
Yes, I am. Yes, sir. My husband and I purchased our home a little over 10 years ago. We purchased in the area we did because of the close-knit neighborhood community and large yards that are great for raising a family. Everything changed for us a few years ago when neighbors, as part of an LLC, purchased the home in between our residence and theirs. They turned it into a short-term rental, which has begun a long-term nightmare for all of us. We live in RS1, which is residential only. Mrs. Slyman refers to short-term rentals and their operation in her November letter to the Bass Family Properties. It is my understanding that businesses operate, homes do not. The definition, according to Webster's, of residential is of or connected with residents, of characterized by or suitable for residences or homes, chiefly for residents rather than transient, short-term rentals or of a transient nature. We never know who will be next door to us on a day-to-day basis. Occupants are not required to provide any form of identification upon arrival, so you don't know who actually rented it is actually staying there, or if it's a total different group of people. Anyone with a credit card can rent them, and we're in constant fear for our safety of ourselves and our children. Furthermore, the short-term rental next to us is less than 300 feet from a middle school. There has been a constant flow of random strangers coming and going. SDRs have become extremely popular as wedding and shower venues and also as party houses. This is becoming a trend with short-term rentals because it's cheaper than a party room at a commercial location or a reception hall. We've also had weddings next door and parties, many parties. This can cause an enormous issue with parking and traffic congestion and safety. Most residential homes are not equipped to accommodate events such as these. An SDR's ad may state that no parties are allowed, yet they still occur and are not stopped. The penalty is that the renter loses their deposit, furthering the owner's profit while residents are forced to live through it, which we've had to do on multiple occasions. I had one SDR customer leaning against my home smoking a cigarette when I left to take my kids out on a bike ride one morning. I had no idea who this man was or where he had come from. It was terrifying, and my kids had already raced ahead of me. While I was locking the door, I looked up and saw him. I was scared that if I tried to get them back inside the house, he could have gotten to my door before I could get my 3-year-old and 5-year-old at the time to my home. I decided to get away as quickly as possible. Then he proceeded to follow me down the street and make the corner and stand there and stare at me and my children while we walked. He turned around finally when he saw me take out my cell phone as I was watching him, and I then called my husband, who watched him on our security cameras walk back to the short-term rental behind us. Now, what this man was doing was not illegal, but how would you feel if a stranger was following your family member and their small children from your home after leaning against your home? I'm asking you all to please consider these issues and the impact short-term rentals can have on our community. I'm not asking for short-term rentals to be completely banned from the city. I'm asking for these businesses to be kept out of our residential-only areas. The idea is being publicized that owners of these businesses currently operating in residential areas will be left bankrupt or destitute. This is extremely inaccurate. They can long-term rent to someone who will have a vested interest in our community. If they don't want to do long-term rental, they can sell their property and buy property zoned business. We bought a nice home in a residential-only neighborhood. We chose not to live in a commercial area or next door to a hotel. How is our expectation of security and a certain quality of life less important than an entrepreneur's desire to earn a profit no matter what it costs to a neighborhood? Would you want this next door to you or your family? Would you want this next to your child or grandchild's school? Short-term rentals have a place, and it's not in residential neighborhoods. And if you allow them everywhere, who's going to control it? I'll ask you to consider this again if you'd want this next door to you. And we are currently surrounded by 2 on either side of us. And we've had many, many incidents, many, many scares, and it's just been an ongoing fight. And we purchased a home to live in a nice neighborhood community. We did not purchase a home near a hotel. We did not purchase a home in the middle of downtown. It's not right that these businesses are being allowed to run in a residential area. They are completely transient. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Ms. Sheffler, you said that you live in a neighborhood with an ordinance. What neighborhood do you live in? What's the neighborhood? Is it Oak Lawn? What's the name of the? Cuomo Place subdivision, and you do have an ordinance in place?
I never
Please come up to the mic so we can.
Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, no, I never said we had an ordinance. I said we were relying on this board to help enforce the zoning laws in place already. I don't know, sorry if you heard me
So
say ordinance.
So Cuomo subdivision does not have an ordinance on file?
Like an HOA, you mean?
No, like an ordinance. Every subdivision has an ordinance that states, for example, across the street, you had a deal with St. Myrtle Place and a Bourne recently. They had an ordinance.
I'm not sure, I'm so sorry.
It's
I
okay.
have no idea.
Sorry. I just want to make sure.
The covenants or something?
Covenants, yes.
I don't know that we've got that in our neighborhood. It's an ancient neighborhood.
All right, any other question from board members? All right, we'll hear from,
Wait, Mary, would you be able to find out if Cuomo subdivision has a covenant on file? Okay, thank you.
so we'll hear from Ms. Slyman or the LCG representatives. Again, 30-minute time limit.
Good evening, Daniel Goche. I'm an assistant city parish attorney. I'm here on behalf of the administrator, Mary Slyman, Director of Development and Planning for Lafayette Consolidated Government. So I've prepared a slideshow for the board tonight that goes over a couple of issues. First, there's a procedural background, how we got here. Next is an overview of the authority granted to the administrator under the LDC to authorize an undefined use like a short-term rental, the reasons why she made the decision she made, and the justifications for those decisions, and a couple of other things. So we can go through it now. So procedurally, and this is not everything that happened procedurally, these are the high-level main points. December of 19, the appellants filed their first zoning complaint against Bass Family Properties operating at 105 Poinsettia. Their allegation, their chief allegation, was that the operation at 105 Poinsettia as a short-term rental was in violation of the UDC. Now we call it the LDC. On February 7th, the prior administrator, before Director Slyman, issued a use violation letter to the Bass Family Properties. And the prior administrator concluded that the use table did not include lodging short-term rental as a by right permitted use in RS1 neighborhoods, or RS1 zoning districts. On March 9th, so the following month, Bass actually files an appeal of the then administrator's decision prohibiting him from operating a short-term rental. It was scheduled a number of times for this board to hear that appeal. Due to COVID-19, that meeting was pushed back several times, and it actually never got heard. In the meantime, the current administrator issued a notice to Bass under 8921C of the LDC, it was the UDC then, that short-term rentals are not defined by the UDC and are permitted in RS1 zoning districts. And that conclusion was based on the administrator's authority under 8921C to authorize an undefined use in a zoning district. Now that reasoning or that power was not considered or used by the previous administrator. On November 11th, the next day, Bass dismisses his appeal. It's no longer applicable before this board. And then in February of this year, the appellants filed a current appeal, and that's where we are tonight. So the question before the Boza board tonight is really, there's only one question, and that is whether the administrator acted erroneously in permitting short-term rentals, which are an undefined use, in RS1 zoning districts under the authority of 8921C in the LDC. And this board tonight, in order to reverse or modify the administrator's decision, I'm sure you've seen this, must conclude one of the two: that the decision was erroneous, it's based on an erroneous interpretation of the LDC, or that we need to issue a different decision to avoid a violation of constitutional rights. So let's talk about the authority that the administrator has currently in the LDC under Section 8921C. So keep in mind that 8921, as you may know, is the section of the UDC that establishes the uses that are permitted in each zoning district across the city of Lafayette. So it's a pretty broad section of the UDC. It would be impossible to provide an exhaustive list of every conceivable, possible, or future use of property when the UDC was first adopted and then the LDC. And so to avoid any gaps or any issues, 8921 was established, 8921C, I should say, that provides that if there is a use that's not defined, the administrator may authorize that use in a zoning district if it meets certain criteria, and there are four, and I think the appellants touched on it earlier. The use, functionally the same, is a listed use, or the use has similar visual, traffic, environmental, or other impacts as expressly listed, or other comparatively sized jurisdictions have successfully integrated the use in one or more equivalent zoning districts. And finally, the use is within the same industry classification as another permitted use. And so keep in mind that only one of the above criteria is required in order for the administrator to authorize the undefined use pursuant to her authority in 8921C. It only takes one. And so what I would say to the board is that if, and I'm going to go through the reasons, I'm going to go through 1 through 3 on why we think this is a valid authorize of the administrator's power. But if this board agrees with any one of those, then you have to deny the appeal. So the first one, the use functionally the same is a listed use. Short-term rentals are functionally the same as an accessory apartment, which is a listed and permitted by right use currently in RS neighborhoods, okay? Accessory apartments are defined as a secondary, independent living facility located in or on the same lot as a single-family residence. An accessory apartment may be rented to a household separate from that occupying the principal building on the lot, and the term household is not defined in the LDC. The only notable difference between a short-term rental and an accessory apartment is that short-term rentals do not have to be located on the same lot as the principal use. There's no minimum or maximum term for an accessory apartment rental. There's no requirement that the principal building be owner-occupied. So the two uses are functionally the same in that they contemplate or permit the renting of a residential structure in an RS neighborhood for an undetermined period of time to someone other than the owner. And this next point is pretty crucial. In fact, accessory apartments contemplate and permit currently in RS zoning districts the renting of two residential structures on the same lot for an undetermined period of time by potentially different parties, both of whom are not the owner. So that's reasoning number one, is that we equate short-term rentals to accessory apartments, which are permitted by right use. Number two is that the use has similar visual, traffic, environmental, and other impacts as an expressly listed use. And so I've listed out, what I've done here is I've listed out all of the by right uses in RS zoning districts, all the uses that you don't have to ask permission for in order to just operate or operate. And then there's two uses in RS zoning districts that are conditional. And so by right, we have a single family detached dwelling, we have an accessory apartment, and we have a community home. Conditional, we have cottage courts and townhouses and row houses. All of the above currently allow renters or tenants to occupy these structures, and they present similar visual, traffic, and environmental impacts as a short-term rentals. And in some cases, they have greater impacts than a short-term rental. For example, if you have a row of 5 3-bedroom townhomes, there's a potential to have 15 cars for that development. That may present a parking problem. Likewise, a community home, which allows for up to 6 people, may present with environmental impacts. It may not. But all of these are currently permitted in an RS zoning district. And I would add, going back to the previous slide, accessory apartment in certain cases would present similar visual, traffic, and environmental impacts. Certainly if there was 2 structures being occupied at the same time on the same lot by different people, the impacts would certainly be similar. So the third one is that other jurisdictions have successfully integrated the use in one or more equivalent zoning districts. And then what I'd like to show the board tonight is that you need to look no further than the city of Lafayette for an example of a jurisdiction that has, since Airbnbs have started, successfully integrated short-term rentals into its zoning districts. And so here are some of the facts. And we've heard that the number 300 might be a little higher, might be a little less. But there are 300, more or less, short-term rentals currently operated in Lafayette Parish. RS1 zoning districts make up the vast majority of land area in the city of Lafayette. And this is a map of the city of Lafayette overlaid with RS1 zoning districts. So you can see, at least with regards to the city, just how much land area is taken up by the RS1 zoning district. So prior to the 2019 complaint of the appellants, the Department of Development and Planning had never received a written complaint of short-term rentals. So some additional facts that I'd like to point out. Neither traditional rentals nor short-term rentals are defined, as we know, in the LDC, yet we would not say that traditional rentals are prohibited in any zoning district. Even though undefined, they're nevertheless permitted even in RS districts. And this next point, there's been a lot of misconception about whether short-term rentals are regulated or not. The short-term rental itself may not have a specific section of regulations in the UDC, but they are regulated. They're regulated by a number of different laws, and I'm going to touch on it in a second. Specifically, parking, noise, nuisance, and litter that are applicable to all properties in Lafayette. And so, as you'll see, many of these concerns are the concerns of the appellant. And what we would say is that current existing laws regulate in these areas and address most of these appellant's concerns. For example, parking. We have a slew of laws in the Code of Ordinances, Chapter 86, Article 9, Division 1 through 5, that deal strictly with parking regulations. When you can park on the street, where you can park on the street, for how long you can park on the street. And those sections of the code are 86-125, just for your reference, through 86-143, as well as 86-162 through 86-173. So there's a number of them. Noise is another great example. We have a comprehensive noise ordinance in this city. That can be found in Chapter 34, Article 4, noise control. In fact, if you have an issue with a neighbor, whether it's a short-term rental or whether it's a traditional rental or it's just your neighbor, that you have a noise issue, you can contact the noise control administrator, and somebody will physically go to your house with a meter and stand out there and listen with the meter to see if it violates a certain decibel level based on what zoning district you're in. And if the noise is great enough to violate the law, then you'll be cited for that law, for violating that law. And so those can be found at 34 361 through 34, 371, and the table of decibel levels, based on what zoning district you're in, can be found at 34, 366. Finally, the other example I'd like to point out is litter. There are also a number of laws addressing litter, but in general, it's against the law to litter or permit the littering on public or private property in the entire parish. And you can be cited under that law if you violate that law. Okay. So applicants warn of parking, traffic, noise, litter, nuisance issues, but these issues, again, are not unique to short-term rentals. They exist in every use of property in every zoning district. And so we'd submit that it would not be reasonable to prohibit a use of property based on concerns of possible future violations of already existing laws. The next point is that Louisiana law does allow a neighborhood to adopt building restrictions or restrictive covenants, which I think we spoke about earlier, that can regulate or prohibit the operation of a short-term rental. There's a whole framework in the Civil Code that allows you to start from scratch, allows a neighborhood to start from scratch and implement these types of restrictions. Or if they're already existing, there's a whole body of laws that allows or controls for you to amend those restrictions and change them. So short-term rentals have been operating, from what we can tell, in Lafayette for 10 plus years, but no written complaints to development and planning prior to December of 19. And we are aware, at least of the writing of this PowerPoint presentation, of 2 complaints by Lafayette Police Department. One in March of 19, and one of 2020, both related to 105.7. And so the last thing that I'd just like to point out is that there was some talk about our zoning laws being permissive, which the import being whatever's not permitted should be or is prohibited. And so what I did here is I just pointed out a couple of Supreme Court of Louisiana cases that talk about zoning laws inversely. In other words, anything that's not prohibited is permitted. And so there's a couple of quotes from these cases that says, zoning laws are in degradation of property ownership and must be strictly construed in favor of the property owner. And that was in the 60s. The next case, a zoning ordinance which is subject to more than one reasonable interpretation should be construed in favor of unrestricted use of the property, right? Where exemptions in zoning laws appear in favor of a property owner, these exemptions should be liberally construed in favor of the property owner. And so while these factors weren't necessarily considered when the administrator made her decision, I thought it was necessary to point it out to the board on how our Louisiana Supreme Court has dealt with zoning ordinances in general. And so if the board has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Do we have a copy of the PowerPoint for the
You
board?
should, or I can certainly get you one.
All right. Any questions from the board?
I think Mr. DeCluet stole mine. Why were we not provided a copy of your presentation before this meeting?
What's that?
Why were we not provided a copy of your presentation before this meeting?
This certainly was the intent.
It comes as a surprise, I might say. Your point was that in accordance with C, and can you put that slide back up?
Garland, I'll also comment, it was submitted to staff earlier today, so if you didn't have a copy in your, it was not intentional.
It's all good.
Okay.
Mr. Escott, as the board's attorney, do you agree with everything that's presented here? Well, let me be specific. Yeah, do you agree with this slide?
Let me say this. As the board's attorney, I don't believe it's my role to provide you with that answer. You are
My
hearing...
engineering professors used
Yeah.
to say the same thing.
I think that, certainly you've got counsel for Ms. Slyman that's asserting that to be the case. I'm just not sure it's within my purview or role as the board's attorney. I can answer this, if maybe this will help in terms of the procedure, perhaps. But knowing what the documents are that have been submitted, that the decision of the administrator that is being appealed that's before you was in fact utilizing 8921C, and that the language is pretty clear in the LDC as to what your role is in determining, whether or not her decision was erroneous, and the basis for her decision was it has to be based on one of the four. 1, 2, 3, or all four. Does that give you some insight?
Yes.
Yes, and I think the interpretation can then be that she may have been right on one point, but the other three or then at that point are irrelevant.
Well, I think the point being made by
Daniel?
by counsel is that it's not 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, it's 1 or. And so as lawyers, and we read those words as meaning it only has to be one or the other or the other. It can be more than one, but it has to be at least one of the following.
And just to add our position on that is that in order for you to amend or reverse or modify the administrator's decision tonight, you have to expressly conclude on all accounts, not just on one of the accounts, that her decision was erroneous. It's the only way you can overturn it. And so it's not maybe she took an interpretation of the LDC and y'all take a different interpretation. It's her interpretation was 100% erroneous, is the only way under 80, I have the citation here, 8968F2, the decision has to be erroneous.
But do you agree that based on that other slide, if she is correct on any one of those points, then we cannot overturn her decision?
That's exactly what I'm saying, yes.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, when looking through these, you list a few different things, accessory apartments and all that. When you get to the ones where you're looking at similar functionally the same or similar impact, what stands out to me is the ones that I would say are similar or functionally the same, all fall underneath a conditional use. So, to me, that's, and the decision that was made is not a conditional use, it's a permitted use, so how does?
Sure, I would just add accessory apartments to that list as well, absolutely. In that there's more than one structure on a single lot being occupied by two separate groups, both of whom are not the owners, for an undetermined amount of time. That is currently permitted by right in RS neighborhoods.
Okay. Hey, please, this is the board's time right now. You'll get the chance to give your public comments. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the board?
To support if I do, and I did, do a word search in the LDC online through the LCG, short-term rental, I get one fine, and that's associated with bed and breakfast, which is a conditional use in RS1 district. And I share the chairman's concern. That's all I have, Mr.
And one, the use functionality, the same as listed, but the accessory apartment, I mean, that to me, I mean, number one.
Okay.
Daniel, I have one more question with you representing Ms. Slyman. If because of this constraint, we're under 8921C, as you eloquently listed, if there was something functionally in error, such as the commercial use within a residential property, are you still saying that we could, as the board, would not have the authority to overturn her decision?
Said another way, I don't think the director is saying that there's a commercial use going on here. She's equating it, in at least one of these instances, to an accessory apartment, which may be a commercial enterprise in that it's owned by somebody other than who's going to rent it. She's not, you don't have to use the tagline commercial or not to get there, is what I'm saying.
Do you draw any substance in that she used the term short-term rentals and their operation?
Not at all.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much. All right, we will now hear from the property owner or their representative, and they will be allowed a 30-minute time. Thank you.
Why don't you sit here and I'll move down? We have several binders of documents for the board so that you can follow along with what he's referring to. Should I pass those out, or how do we just?
Yeah, if you can go ahead and bring them up and pass them out, we can follow along. Sorry, my late colleague here went to go try and grab a drink from in the back, so he may be locked out back there. We'll go ahead and let you start. Please give us your name and.
Okay, my name is Mike Bass. My address is 203 Iris Lane. My wife and I own, excuse me. My wife and I own 105 Poinsettia with my parents, Ken and Catherine Bass, who are retired. They live in Texas. All of us here love our neighborhood. Aaron and I moved in 2008 to 203 Iris Lane. We live there with our daughter, and we are right next door to 105 Poinsettia. My parents stay there when they're in town, and we have a letter in the binders that you have at tab 10 that talks more about this, but I'm going to try to quickly hit some of the highlights. If you guys go to tab 1, we've made a map here, and this is a map of our neighborhood. You can see our two properties right next to each other. We went ahead and highlighted the appellant's properties in green. In yellow, we've highlighted all the rentals in our neighborhood. So you can see there's quite a few. Rentals have historically been part of our neighborhood, adds to the flavor of our neighborhood. So you can see they're really all around here. Let's go to tab 2. We've got some photos. And you can see how close our houses are together, literally right on top of each other. So we can see everything that goes on over there. So we have no desire for anything loud or disruptive for anyone that stays at 105 Poinsettia. The picture below shows the properties across the street from us. So you can see there's a threeplex, an older home that was split into 3 pieces. There's a detached apartment, an upstairs garage apartment. These are all directly across the street from 105 Poinsettia and from our home. So that whole little area has always been rentals. And in fact, 105 Poinsettia was a rental for decades before we purchased it. When we bought it, it was not well maintained. And we spent a lot of late nights with friends and family fixing up the house. We ended up investing about $70,000 into this home once it was all said and done, which I think is a pretty good investment in our house and in our neighborhood. Before we started operating as a short-term rental, I called planning and zoning and I asked them what sort of rules or permits we would need, and they said that we didn't need any. We've got some before and after photos, so you can kind of see what the home looked like before we cleaned it up. In one of the photos, you can see the 8-foot privacy fence that we put between our property and the Shefflers who live directly behind us. We've got some photos showing parking. You can see sort of how parking works in our neighborhood. A lot of older homes. Our own house only has a spot for 1 vehicle. And in that bottom photo, you can see we have ample parking at 105 Poinsettia. And went ahead and included some photos from our friend's wedding. Our friends got married in our backyard on this Saturday afternoon at Festival International. So this was a private use of our home, not related to Airbnb activity. If you go to tab 3, you'll see that these are our own, these are the policies or rules that we leave for everyone that stays with us, just reminding them of all of our policies. No parties, obviously, no events. And this reminds them of our neighborhood's quiet hours and just talks about the neighborhood, so they're respectful. Tab 4 is actually screenshots from our Airbnb listing, so you can see in there what our exact rules and regulations are. Again, no parties, no events. It's a 2-night minimum. You do have to have a government ID. Tab 5, you'll see Airbnb has some kind of a new no party or events policy. So they're also looking out to make sure no one's having parties in these Airbnbs. And there's also the Airbnb security statement. So that just talks a little bit more about all the things that they do. There's some links in there as well. Tab 6, we've got, I did a public records request on my own property. I know that's been talked about, but what I can say confidently is we've had zero noise, nuisance, or parking violations. The cops have never been called out there for noise or anything like that. Tab 7, we've got our reviews. This is important because, obviously our guests review us, but we also review the people that stay there. So there's accountability there. If you want to use Airbnb, if you act up, you may not be able to rent again. And so you can see in here that some of these guests had 9 reviews or 6 reviews. We read every one of these before we let somebody stay. So if we see any red flags, we just decline them. We don't take any chances. And that's part of that control is what I think short-term rental operators like. If you're not going to be around that weekend, or you want to use the property for yourself, like we often do, our property, you just block the dates out. We've had 2 of my daughter's birthday parties over there and use it for our own use quite a bit. Tab 8, I know you guys got a lot of supportive emails for us. I just picked out a few. Looks like on the second page here, I want to point out 2 emails from 2 different young ladies that lived in the apartments directly across the street from our Airbnb. So they talk about just what it was like living across from the Airbnb. They never had any issues. They never felt unsafe, and they actually enjoyed meeting people from different areas. One thing about everyone that stays with us is they typically have some sort of connection to Lafayette, whether they're there for a wedding or it's typically families visiting family. We have a lot of people from the area that come back. They bring their kids to visit, grandma and grandpa. So that's a lot of who we have stay with us. Also have an email here from our neighbor who, she can see our Airbnb through her kitchen window, and she just talks about how she's never had any issues, and she talks about how gross the house was before we purchased it. So that's what we've been up to the past 3.5 years at 105 Poinsettia. Again, we live right next door. We're in constant contact with everyone that stays over there. As far as this bigger conversation about Airbnbs, I think this is a good conversation to have. Other areas are having this conversation, Baton Rouge and Shreveport, so we're no different there. Aaron and I are passionate about tourism, so we welcome those conversations and we want to be part of those moving forward. So thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Bass?
Thank you for your presentation. Very nicely done. If there was an Airbnb next to you that was not as conscientious as you have been,
What would I do? How would I feel?
Would you still be admonishing your last statement that we should continue a discussion?
Yeah, I would. I mean, we do it because we like to do it, but also we kind of believe in the concept. Right. So if I had one next to me, I'd be open-minded about it. I probably would be excited to meet people that were over there. And, they talked about existing laws. If there's an issue, talk to the owner, call the cops, if there was a really bad issue. So I feel like I would be fine with that.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Hi, I'm Erin Bass. I live with Mike at 203 Iris Lane and also operate 105 Poinsettia. And so I want to point out that our own house is like 10 feet away. I mean, it's so close. So, I mean, I walk over there almost every day if somebody's there. I'm constantly, looking out the window and checking on things, watering the plants. I've always made it a point to be very diligent about making sure that whoever was staying there, of course, was comfortable and having a wonderful time, but also not disturbing our neighbors. And like you said, we've lived in our house for 11 years, and our 5-year-old daughter attends school at Myrtle Elementary, so we walk back and forth to school each day. We ride bikes in the neighborhood. We even pick up trash when we see it on the street. So we're very invested in the neighborhood, and we do care about the neighborhood and our neighbors. We're not indifferent to this situation. And we really see our short-term rental as an extension of our house and our yard. The backyards connect by a gate. Like you said, his parents stay there when they visit. I've had family members stay there when they're in town. We've also had neighbors come just for a little weekend getaway. And I've had some of the neighbors that are here tonight ask me about their family members staying there. So, if you don't have a guest room in your house or you don't have space for your family, we're happy to accommodate you in that way. And during Hurricane Laura, I think short-term rentals really proved, what we could do because there was a housing shortage and, there was no shelter here. And so we housed a family of 4 from Lake Charles for a month. And the mom homeschooled her younger daughter at a table in the front window. My daughter became friends with them. They still exchange cards with each other. We exchanged Christmas cards. So, these are not, I want to make the point that our guests who are staying there are not strangers. They're not outsiders. They're not dangerous. They're nice people. They're families. We meet them a lot of the time. We become friends with them. We stay in touch with them. I would say that 80% of the time they have a connection to Lafayette and the neighborhood. A lot of times they're visiting their own family members who live around the corner or a couple streets away. And they tell us that when they're booking. And if they don't tell us why they're coming, I ask, what they're coming to town for, just so we have an idea. And so I wanted to bring our guest book, but I think my daughter confiscated it before we left, so she's probably drawing in it. But anyway, just some of the reviews we've had, mention how quiet the neighborhood is, how nice the neighbors are. Somebody said, I almost felt like I had just moved into a new home with the way people would greet us when we were coming and going. And they also mention, how responsive we are. So if somebody's staying there, I've got my, phone next to me all the time to make sure that if there's a message coming in, I can respond if there's an issue. And vice versa, if I hear them being loud, anywhere close to our quiet hours, I will send them a message or walk over there. So in my closing, I just want to ask you to consider, what your decision tonight could do in terms of, putting a lot of us out of business, and also what it would do to our tourism industry, the economy, and Lafayette's image as one of the friendliest places in the world. Thank you.
Any questions from the board?
Oh, sorry.
No. Thank you.
Ms. Bass, how long, 2008? When did I move in? 2008?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 8. Uh-huh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. Any other?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Gary McGoffin, I'm the attorney for Bass Family Properties, LLC. My remarks have been greatly condensed after hearing the director's attorney explain the regulatory issues. I had addressed that in a letter which is included at tab number 11 of your materials, but you don't need to go over that because they went into much more detail than I did there. One of the things I found interesting about this is the last sentence of the appeal is this: appellants, having lost their opportunity to be heard by the director's November 10, 2020 determination, thus submit this appeal as their only chance to be heard on the issue of whether short-term rentals should be permitted in their neighborhood. And that's not correct. There's several other opportunities they have. One, which they've availed themselves of, if you go to tab 12, is the lawsuit that they have filed against Bass Family Properties, alleging that there is a nuisance, that there's a violation of the city regulations, and that there are problems there. We are going to deal with those things. Those are more behavioral issues, I think, rather than use issues. But we have the court of law that's going to decide those. So it would be erroneous to say that this hearing this evening and this determination tonight is going to be the only opportunity they have to be heard. Separate from that, they have spoken with the Lafayette City Council. There were 2 meetings, one in July, one in September of last year, in which this issue came up, the issue of short-term rentals. Of the video of the short-term rental discussion is referenced in my letter to you, and so you can go to that and find it and see what their remarks were then. It's substantially the same as now. But the point being, the council is already underway in considering what to do about the question of short-term rentals in the city. So rather than it being determined in a regulatory environment, which is what this would be, it should be determined in a legislative environment where there's a more comprehensive approach to the big picture so that everybody knows what the rules are, everyone has a chance for an opportunity to have input into it, and to come out with a solution that makes sense for Lafayette. In addition, there was a question earlier about covenants for the neighborhood. To the best of my knowledge, none exist now, but the Code of Civil Procedure at Articles 775 through 783 do provide the mechanism for adoption of subdivision covenants if the neighborhood would choose to do so. That would mean the neighborhood would have to come together and agree to a general plan of how they're going to govern their neighborhood. That's a lot of work, but it's appropriate because then all the local considerations, all the neighborhood considerations could be taken up at that particular time. And then lastly, as was pointed out earlier, all of the behavioral things already have regulations in place to address them with regard to litter, parking, noise, nuisance, and that sort of thing. With regard to today, if you go to tab 11, which is my letter, and go to the second page of that letter, I'm sorry, the third page, and it's the first full paragraph, which follows the authority which the director has for being able to make determinations, and that was explained well earlier. But if you go to the case law about this, and this is an administrative determination, and how an administrative board works has been discussed a lot in the law, as you can imagine. As a general proposition, if the evidence supports a determination of an administrative agency, its orders should be accorded great weight and should not be reversed or modified in the absence of a clear showing that the administrative action is arbitrary and capricious. The test for determining whether the action is arbitrary and capricious is whether the action taken is reasonable under the circumstances. Or stated another way, the question is whether the action was taken without reason. What you've seen tonight is that the director had several good reasons. She had the opportunity to hear the discussion from council, or with the council in July and in September. And the question was, why was there a February letter and why was there a change in November? Well, there was a lot of discussion in July and September. This became an issue which needed to be determined. And so it was revisited on a much more comprehensive basis by looking at what the authority was of the director to allow the use, because it was consistent with the exceptions that were provided. The next thing we have to consider in terms of administrative discussions is who has the burden of proof. And right now, it's presumed the director's action should stand unless the appellants come forward with sufficient proof, not questions, not concerns, but proof that there was no reasonable basis for the director's decision. And there's a lot of concern expressed and a lot of very fair concern expressed tonight, but I haven't heard that proof. So with that, we'll cede the rest of our time. We appreciate your consideration tonight. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to discuss them.
Any questions from the board?
In your letter of April 6, 2021, you referred on several occasions to, and I apologize, I mean, thank you for providing this document.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. You basically refer to this, and I'm assuming you're speaking both as your client's representative and your personal opinion, that this whole issue is more of a public policy issue as opposed to something to be determined on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, sir.
When you received the November 10th letter and had a chance to review that, was it your interpretation of Ms. Lyman's letter that the decision was based on her verifying, as has been presented to us today, that there's justification for A, B, C, D, whatever, 1, 2, 3, 4? Or was it that, was your interpretation of what was, the decision was based on that the UDC was silent with respect to short-term rentals? And as such, I should say LDC was silent with respect to short-term rentals, and therefore there wasn't anything substantive found to overturn that permitted use?
No, if you go, do you have a copy of the letter, the
Yes, I
November
do.
10th letter?
Sure.
If you go to the middle of that first paragraph, it says, pursuant to UDC section, and I assume it's LDC section, whatever, 89-21C, which we reviewed this evening, and is applying the guidelines contained therein, the administrator has determined that the use of your property as a short-term rental at 105 Poinsettia Street will be considered an authorized use by this office. I took that at face value as to what was meant.
So you took it at face value that there was supporting documentation that she had worked the process through with legal counsel to make that decision?
Yes, sir.
Would you interpret her decision as attorney that applies to any short-term rental anywhere in Lafayette, Louisiana?
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, so our next section is our public comments. So hopefully everyone has turned in that would like to come up and speak, has turned in a comment card to staff. You will be limited to 3 minutes on your comments. You've seen what our decisions are going to be based on, so please try and address that. It will help us in our decision, along exposition about other topics is not going to help determine the case for us. You will be limited to that 3 minutes, and if I feel necessary, I will try to get you back on center. I'm not trying to be rude, just trying to make sure we all get heard and through this as quickly as possible. So we'll go with proponents for the
Mr. Chair, I can sort the cards that way, but I took them as they came in, with the appellants being first. Because they have also signed speaker cards to be part of public comment.
Okay, well, just whatever order you have them in, just go through. I won't make you do a bunch of card sorting.
Mr. Gordon Sheffler.
And you will have, as the appellants, you will have another chance to speak after all comments. So
That's
if
what
you
I
want to just
understood.
wait till then, all right, thank you.
Next is Allison Sheffler. Colby Longlinay. Jean Longlinay. Michael Bass. All right, our first speaker is Andre Cuomo.
When you come up, please give us your name and address, please, for the record.
Andre Cuomo, 506 Roselawn Boulevard, and I am not in favor of the appeal. I am against the appeal. I live on Roselawn Boulevard. My wife and I also have investment property on Memory Lane that we list as a short-term rental on Airbnb. It has been our joy to host numerous families from around the country and parts of the world, and to showcase the local hospitality and friendly Cajun culture that is unique to our hometown. Some of our guests have been families of college baseball players in town for a 3-game series at UL. Some are in town for weddings, and the house we rent gives families from different parts of the country the option to spend time together like a family while in town for their event. Some are pure tourists. We had a family from Paris with small children who marveled at the squirrels in the backyard. We bought the property to house our daughter and 2 roommates while they were at UL. After they all graduated and moved out, we were leery about long-term rental because of family members who had experienced problems with long-term renters. My sister at that time had an Airbnb and had hosted for some time. She found that the pre-screening and rules set up resulted in very good quality of renters, people who were polite, respectful, and clean. We had met several of her guests, and we were impressed. So we set up our place as a short-term rental. Now, at the risk of offending some of my home neighbors, I will say there are owner-occupied and long-term rental properties where we live that we would gladly trade for an Airbnb. One is a 3-quarter house providing short-term housing for a variety of people working through drug rehabilitation. Another appears occupied by hoarders, and another is occupied by a mechanic who works on just about everything in his driveway except apparently his own lawnmower. That's how it is in my neighborhood, which is zoned RS1. In the neighborhood where we have our short-term rental, also RS1, the neighbors know what we are doing, they appreciate how we have improved and maintained the property, and how we manage the guests we are hosting. We heard at the Council and Planning Commission meetings last year fear that short-term rentals would bring drug use, prostitution, wild parties, traffic jams, lower property values, and bad people into our neighborhoods. The council did not act on those fears, and we trust you will also not act on those fears. You may have noticed the comic strip in the newspaper just today. In The Advocate, the characters were discussing how best to research Airbnb for the right getaway after being stuck at home during the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, Airbnb has become mainstream. Lafayette should embrace this short-term rental and not discourage it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Connie Baudouin. Okay. Stephen Hebert.
All right.
Pat Mold. And after Mr. Mold will be Rosemary. I believe that's Turpey? Turpey? You can come up to the mic and afterwards, after Mr. Mold's done, then it'll be you.
Please give us your name and address.
Oh, Patrick Mold, 520 Cedar Crest Court, and 521 and 521 and a half Cedar Crest Court. So I just want to clarify one thing before starting, is that it's been said that short-term rentals are a business for profit. Well, long-term rentals are as well. That's why they call them investment properties. So I own 2 properties, like I said, that I Airbnb. They were long-term rentals before I went to Airbnb about 5 years ago. And I had so much problems with long-term rentals that if I had to get rid of my short-term rentals, I'd probably sell the property. That's how bad it was. My first long-term renter kind of spoiled me into thinking all long-term renters were the best. She kept the house clean, mowed the lawn, kept up the place as they were her own. After 6 years, she moved out. For the next few years, it was a string of bad tenants, one after another. They either moved out or was forced to evict due to not paying rent or destroying my property. And then Airbnb came along, as I said, no more missed rents. And if a guest accidentally breaks something or no shows, Airbnb deals with it. The money goes straight into my account. No more chasing people for income. So they like my place because it's close to downtown, the Lafayette arts and dining and entertainment scene. My rental income is deposited, as I said, directly into my bank account. I pay bills, including mortgage, insurance, utilities, fiber to the home, repairs, keep the lawn up, upgrades to the property, and anything I can do to make the guest experience the best it can be. I do Airbnb because short-term is way easier than long-term, end of story, period. And I would hate to lose this critical income that it's kind of for my retirement. So y'all don't take my retirement away from me, please. I would have to think long, like I said, long and hard about if y'all did try to take it away. You know, all this, what's sad about this is it just seems to be neighbors against neighbors here, and it's affecting a lot of other people who are in the short-term rental business, and that's a shame. We are regulated, contrary to popular belief, by Airbnb stringently. If we get bad reviews, they threaten to take our properties away. Regulation is not a problem. We don't mind being regulated. We pay taxes. We actually pay the hotel motel tax here in Lafayette Parish. So, you know, I've had problems with long-term renters. I've had to call the police on myself, you know. So, I mean, I think we have laws that will mitigate any sort of issues, whether it's noise, parties, people, you know, if the law's got to be called, the law's got to be called. And the same applies for long-term versus short-term. So that's about all I have to say.
Thank you. And please, when you come up, give us if you are for the appeal or against the appeal before you start. Thank you. Please give us your name and address.
Because of this, we've had cussing of guys in the neighborhood, I mean, that they rent it to, that I can hear it in my house. That's how loud it has been. And I don't want to live in a neighborhood like this. I lived in this house 26 and a half years. I lived on Cedar Crest Court before that. I lived in this round neighborhood 65 years. And I do not want to have a neighborhood that's going to be like this. We've also had them to where they rented and they had so many people in the house, they had tents in the backyard. I mean, this shouldn't be allowed. I don't care what they're saying about, and I'm not against B&Bs, but there needs to be regulations and stipulations. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Ken Mishu. And the next speaker will be Leon, I believe that's Ferguson.
How you doing? Thanks for the opportunity to speak here. I'm Ken Michon, and I live in 105 Oleander, directly across from the Shefflers. We've heard about a bunch of law rhetoric here tonight, and I'm not a lawyer, but I am an engineer with a minor in math, and I hear a bunch of fuzzy math going on. I just have a bunch of questions here for the board. All these people that own Airbnbs that are currently operating prior to the director's decision, are they out of compliance? Who enforces that regulation? Did they break the law? We've heard laws about all kinds of stuff, about litter, trash, parking. There's laws against murder too. It still happens. Who's regulating this? Are you guys responsible for regulating it?
No.
Let me ask you another question. Prior to this topic, this case number, there was 3 other cases, right? Y'all all discussed it after it was presented, made a decision. Am I correct?
Yes.
Okay. So when the director made a decision, back when she made a decision to reverse the previous director's decision, did y'all discuss that?
That's not how that statute is written. It doesn't come before us, no.
That's not how it works?
No.
So y'all don't come together and discuss zoning decisions? Any one of you can arbitrarily make a decision?
No, we don't. We're a volunteer group. We are citizens of the city.
Okay.
This is a
You, sir, have an
volunteer
Airbnb
board.
close to you?
I'm sorry?
Do you have an Airbnb close to you?
I have no idea. I
Mr.
haven't
Chairman,
looked. But this is, your comments, are you for or against the appeal?
I'm for the appeal.
Okay.
And then I'm going to say one more thing, and this is in relation to an existing Airbnb in the vicinity. And the reason I know about it, because it's a family member that owns it. And what happened recently is there was a person that died in that thing. And I understand people die all over the place. But there was some very suspicious activity. You can go through police reports if you want to know more about it. But here's what bothers me about it. When that person vacated that Airbnb, now keep in mind, when the cops did the initial investigation, they said there was no foul play or anything like that. Somebody just OD'd in an apartment, right? An Airbnb-sponsored apartment. Well, when the Airbnb renters vacated that apartment, I personally, as a request of a family member, went in after the fact to check it out. They had replaced the mattresses, all 3 mattresses, 2 headboards, all the towels, linens, and laundry. Didn't even call the owner, didn't call Airbnb or nothing. The reason being, and they were sued, and are being sued, actually. The reason being is I didn't like the stuff that was in there. So this is what we can come to. And then the other thing is, what's to stop someone from buying a property next door to me, tearing it down, and building a low-rise dorm type thing and calling it short-term rental? That's my questions. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank
you. I live at 806 Daphne Drive, and I want to thank all of y'all for your volunteer service. I worked 12 years for Lafayette Consolidated Government as a housing counselor. And tonight, I just would like to tell you a little bit about what happens to neighborhoods, since I worked as a neighborhood counselor for years. When people quit taking pride in their homes, property values fall. A home in disrepair is the first sign of a neighborhood in decay. Short-term rental homes are generally kept in excellent repair and must be appealing. Otherwise, the marketplace would take care of you and no one would rent them. So that's a definite improvement in a rental property. These properties improve the neighborhoods they're in. Excuse me, the next page here. I'm getting old, won't go fast. Okay, come on, guys. There we go. With short-term rentals, a bad tenant can be removed immediately. Call the police, they'll come get them. A long-term rental can take months to evict. The neighborhood suffers while this renter is in that property. In short-term rentals, if short-term rentals are stopped by the actions asked of this board tonight, the tax dollars are going to stop for the city because they do pay hotel and motel taxes. People who purchase property have the right to do with that property as they see fit, as long as it is within the limits of the law that have been established for many years before we came here tonight. A citizen has the right to get an investment on the return that they put into that property. They have a reason to do that. That's why they do it. When people quit investing in our community, it's not going to be long till we don't have anywhere to live and nobody's going to build anything. My experience in this field teaches me that reinvestment in any neighborhood is a very positive impact. The City Council did not vote to approve the changes that are asked of all tonight. Maybe they recognized what a can of worms this issue is, and I'm sorry y'all have to go through it tonight. Please do what is right. Vote no to zoning changes, and don't kill a cottage industry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bobby Dawson. And the next speaker will be Renee Roberts.
My name is Bobby Dawson. I live in 909 Beaujolais Parkway, Frenchman's Creek subdivision. Ladies, gentlemen of the board, I thank you for your time. I appreciate your volunteerism. Being the president of the HOA and also on a volunteer board, it's a pain in the behind. Anybody who does it knows that. I'm kind of in a catch-22 situation. I'll stay on point as close as I can. Mr. Sheffler was correct. I own property on the West Bank in New Orleans in Jefferson Parish. And no, we cannot have Airbnbs. We're locked out. However, recently we have a homeowner who moved and bought an additional home in Atlanta. He leased his home to a realtor company for sale. However, this particular realtor could not sell it as fast as what the homeowner wanted. So what they did, they conveniently leased it to another realtor, who in turn created an Airbnb. Now, we're talking a minimum property value of $350,000 up in Frenchman's Creek. We had continuous traffic in this cul-de-sac in this 3,400 square foot living area home. Not only that, and we talked about, and I heard all the attorneys talking about the nuisance laws and the garbage and the waste and so on and so forth. Well, let me tell you from facts, okay? Not only is this home, it was on a navigable waterway, the Vermilion River. We had an excess of 30 cars at one night in a cul-de-sac of 5 homes. There was probably approximately 50 to 60 people partying. Were the police called? Sure they were. And I've heard, well, we've got laws. How many times has Sheriff Garber's crew, as unmanned as both staffs in the city as well as the parish are, how many times are we going to be on the phone constantly calling for the police to come out? They're shorthanded enough. Why am I for the appeal? Because all this has done is creating a trickle-down domino effect. It doesn't just affect the small inner-line cities. It doesn't just support a simple college-type apartment for a young child going, which I've got a grandchild who's starting college next semester. I understand these situations. But I also understand the trickle-down effect, because what we have is people running in and out of our neighborhood now, destroying the neighborhood. We had litter that we had to call in a crew to come and pick up. That Airbnb is not being regulated because it's a real estate company that's handling it. We've got homes in there now that we can't evict property owners. And yes, we do have ordinances, and yes, we do have bylaws and covenants. But you can't enforce them all. That's all I have to say. Thank you for your time and for your services.
Once again, Renee Roberts. Gerald Judice. And the next speaker will be Ken Rabalay.
I'm Gerald Judice, 1 Hillside Circle.
I also have a couple of Airbnbs that have to be in a condo complex, so it doesn't have the same issues as these do. But all the complaints that I'm hearing about them, you could have the same complaints on the short-term rental, long-term rental, heck, your neighbors themselves, the owners of the homes, or the owners of the home's guests. All these issues are the same in each one of these instances if you have a poorly run place, or you have a neighbor that you don't care for, or that doesn't respect the rest of his neighbors. I agree with the previous people that have said most Airbnb owners and operators have to take care of their properties, or they won't be rented. We also have ratings for guests, and they rate us. So there are certain things in there that are self-solving, I'll say. I don't know if that's the right term to use, but that helps solve those issues. I don't think by changing this ruling, you're going to solve any problems with neighbors that you don't care for, or long-term rentals. You're still going to have those kind of issues. So I would say there's no need to make any changes as it is written. Thank you.
My name is Ken Rabalay. I am against 220 Cambridge Drive, and I'm against the appeal. I live at 220 Cambridge Drive and have been for about 15 years. 10 years ago, I bought the property right next door to me, 224, as an investment, and with the intent of renting it, which it was already occupied. Over the last 10 years, I've had 4 different occupants, and one of the 4 is what I would consider a good tenant. The rest I had to chase rent, just noisy, and about a year and a half ago, I decided to stop the long-term rental and convert to an Airbnb. I consulted with my neighbors, the immediate neighbors, asked what they thought, and they all said, if that's what you want to do, go ahead and do it. I invested about $40,000 in that property, and that was in January of 2020, and of course COVID hit and the fit hit the shan. So have had several experiences and several occupants over that time period, all successful. In the interim, the house on the other side of me became available. I bought that property with the intent of converting it to an Airbnb because of the success with the other one. Spent about $50,000 on that house renovating completely, both inside and out, and upgraded the neighborhood considerably. And knowing that these houses were on either side of me, I felt that I could control what was going on. And after checking, and this is prior to the first one, checking with Airbnb and other owners of Airbnb properties and the regulations that were part of the criteria, we thought we'd give it a try, my wife and I. It has been a very rewarding situation with the people that we've met. All have been very complimentary. Nobody has had any issues neighbor-wise. We're in constant contact with them. We're obviously right next door. They call with any situations. They call for recommendations. Some have continued to contact us. And as somebody else mentioned, most of them have connections to Lafayette, relatives, friends, other occasions. And they come from areas and neighborhoods just like we have. They're good people for the most part, and whether they're renters or not, there's bad eggs all over. People can be in million-dollar homes and have crime, overparking, partying. So I'm against this appeal. I think it's good for Lafayette, for Acadiana, and I appreciate the opportunity to voice my opinion. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Next speaker is Harold Sheffler, followed by Dave Dixon. All right, after Dave would be Catherine Luz.
Of 12 grandchildren who live in Lafayette in the areas we're concerned with. And I'm not against Airbnbs. I have a bunch of rental properties. The only question before you is where you put them. And when you look at a definition of a hotel, it's an establishment that has paid for short-term lodging. So we're dealing with hotels. You have put yourself in a posture where any hotel could come and locate on West By Parkway. We could put a Motel 6 there. We could put a Hilton on East By Parkway. Go down the list, right in the middle of Greenbrier. And we've heard very good attorneys here tonight. Believe me, the Best Westons and the Hiltons have good attorneys too. And they can put their hotels any place they want in Lafayette, including the residential areas that we're dealing with tonight. So I'm very much in favor of the appeal.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Escott. My name is Catherine Lose. I live at 218 Beverly Drive in Lafayette. I am for the appeal. I bought a home in 1982 in a residential neighborhood, and all I knew about it was that it was zoned single-family residential. And I wanted to live in a single-family residential neighborhood because I wanted neighbors. It wasn't about the property, but it was about who would live beside me. And I have been very lucky. I've had tremendous neighbors over the years that I've lived in my neighborhood. My neighbors are friends of mine. They're not just people who occupy a residence. They've met the school bus for my children. They've fed my pets. They've looked after my house. They share the responsibilities that affect everybody in our neighborhood. We bake funeral casseroles. We cut down trees when they fall on people's houses. We paddle canoes to the neighbors when their houses are flooded, and we get them out of their flooded homes. We have a sense of responsibility to each other as our neighbors. We're not only neighbors, but we're friends. We spend our holiday meals together. We share Christmas and Easter and the 4th of July. We have a community, and we've built that community because we all have a stake in our neighborhood, which is a single-family residential neighborhood. Airbnbs are really small commercial hotels. They have people who come and live in them for a brief period of time, and then they leave. They have no relationship with the neighbors. They have no stake in the community. And my fear is that if Airbnbs become common in Lafayette, in older and established neighborhoods, we're going to break the connecting links between the families who are each other's neighbors. I've gotten to know and become friends with my next door neighbors' neighbors and their neighbors because we're all connected. No one's just there for a short amount of time. They're there because they have a stake in the welfare of our neighborhood and a stake in the community of Lafayette. And so I would submit that these Airbnbs are not functionally the same as single-family residential homes. Thanks.
Next speaker is Sarah Sheffler, followed by Aaron Bass. All right, after, well, Gary McGoffin. No. So after Ms. Sheffler will be Pam Justice. Go ahead, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Sarah Sheffler. I live at 3502 East Simcoe Street. I think of businesses that move into our community, of corporations, And I think one of the things, and individual families even, and I think of one of the things that they want to make sure is here in our community before they move into it, is that we get good medical, that we have wonderful schools, that we have a good zoning laws set up, and that they can move into a single family residence if they want that, or they can move into a multifamily residence, or they can move into where you can have parties going on all the time. But when you choose to bring your family into a single family residence, then it needs to stay that way. It doesn't need to be changed, because Airbnbs can be in a lot of different places, but not necessarily in the backyard of families. Thank you.
Pam Justice. Next will be Francis Pavi.
Hi, thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for your time being here. I am for the appeal. I live at 105 Oleander. I am a neighbor to the Shefflers. My reasoning has nothing to do, nothing against Mr. Bass or his family or anything like that. My concern, I've been living there since 2003. I love the neighborhood, put a lot into my home. I have watched people come and go. People are very much family-oriented, a lot of people walking and talking, and that is one of the reasons that I moved there in 2003 to raise my family. My concern is is there any limit to how many certificates you can give or licenses you can give in a certain area? Is there any limit to that? I mean, can someone go in and buy a bunch of, especially in that area, buying up houses there? So could we have, on my street, could I end up being the only homeowner? Everything else is an Airbnb? I guess my concern is where does that stop? Is there any limits to that? And then I started thinking about this noise meter. I'm sorry, but I'm thinking if someone's having a big party and there's noise, and I'm going to call noise control, and they're going to come with a meter there with a bunch of drunk people, and then we sit and wait. Is that what they're telling us to do? Because that is part of the regulations that we're to follow. I guess that just, to me, I would call the cops. I wouldn't use this noise meter that we're talking about. So I guess my concerns are, if these are the types of regulations there are, call noise control. I don't know what the other regulations are. Obviously, there aren't that many. I've read about a lot of others that are pretty strict, but it seems like there's things, but who is really, really, really going to be regulating it? Who is watching this? Now, does the certificate of occupancy, isn't it supposed to be shown in the Airbnb? I read that somewhere in the ordinance that it's supposed to be visible. Are we mandating that? Are we mandating how many people that they can have inside there? When I just heard the story about how many people there were drunk and they were walking all around and parking everywhere. Who's regulating that? So instead we have to call Sheriff Garber or city police to regulate that because we've allowed this. Anyway, my concern is that we are going to lose what we have because we're allowing this with not enough regulations. Thank you for your time.
Once again, Francis. Next will be Patricia Raz.
I'm Francis Pavi. I live at 500 East University Avenue, and I own property 210 Gordon Street in Freetown that I've owned for 40 years. I used to live there, got married, we bought a house. I did long-term rental for many years, and it was a problem, somewhat of a problem. And I had a friend that had an Airbnb, and they said, well, why don't you try that? And it's been so much better than the long-term rentals. I've been doing that for 6 years now, and I was looking back at my reviews, and I have 406 reviews on the property. And they give reviews 4 or 5 stars, and anything less than a 5-star for me would be unacceptable. I'm really conscientious about trying to make the people's experience a good thing here. And most of the people that come here that rent, most of my guests are families. They have connections to the community. They're visiting family. I would say half of those, and some of are travelers, you know, young families, married couples looking for a place to stay and experience Lafayette, Louisiana as a cultural destination. And I enjoy showing them my artwork. I own and operate my studio there. I'm there every day. I have rules about, you know, no parties. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a party at my Airbnb. And also, there's a limit on the amount of people that can come. I never have more than 2 or 3, at the most 4 people. That's families, you know, 2 children, 2 adults. Oh, by the way, I am against the appeal. So all in all, it's been a good experience for me, and I think it's a positive thing for Lafayette. And I just hope that y'all would rule accordingly to the director's decision. Thank you.
Patricia? Next will be Thomas Alonzo.
My name is Patricia Raz. My address is 229 Gauthier Road, and I feel that the director's decision should be supported. And I've been operating Airbnb since 2015. I have 6 at this point. As each one was successful, my family and I made another level of investment of our time and our resources and our talents into being host in this venue called short-term rentals. So much has been said already, but I'd like to tell you who's staying with me tonight. So here's the here and now, who's in one of my six houses. We have 2 houses that house from 4 to 10 people. We have 2 houses that house from 1 to 4 people. We have a studio apartment that's for 1 or 2, and another home that has 2 bedrooms for 4 people. So here's who's with me tonight.
Since that's personal information, I'd rather you not.
Well, it's an example of, it's an example
I get
of
the
who.
point, but you're going to go on records with private people's. Do you
Mr.
understand?
X. Okay, well, may I tell you categorically then?
Yes, ma'am. Fine.
Okay, so these folks, one group is a bicyclist from, that have some connection to the area. They're here for the Zydeco bicycle ride. They're here for a week. Another group are tennis coaches from high schools in Texas, and they're here to play in a tournament. Another group is a national contractor. He and his team are here renovating Kay's jewelry store. They're staying for 3 months. An entrepreneur from Dallas is here to help expand his business. He's staying for a month. And another house is occupied by my family members. So, you know, the diversity that shows up in who comes, the people that come as short-term renters through these online booking entities are people I would rent to. I would rent to these folks. You know, they're folks coming to Lafayette to make a contribution, to enjoy what's here, and to be part of this new industry that's called home sharing in our shared economy. And I do think that as Lafayette steps into examining this issue from all the variety of perspectives, that it makes me have a flashback to the Silicon Bayou. It was a lot of misunderstanding when we were Silicon Bayou and we were bringing in that whole new point of view, but there's lots to learn, and we're a vibrant economy that can share. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thomas Alonso. Sandra Morrow. Next will be Kenneth Menard.
Hello, my name is Sandra Morrow. I live at 614 Calder Street, Elmhurst Park. I used to live at 213 Brashear before, so I've been in that neighborhood for 14 years, and so that the 60-person party was my neighborhood. Sorry, I got a little nervous over here now. And I also made notes because I listened to what everybody said, and you know, it's a business. We're making a business decision.
Are you in favor
Or against?
Pardon me?
Are you in favor?
Oh, favor, for sure. I mean, it's a business in my neighborhood. If I tried to open up a restaurant, I'd be like, come in, eat in my house, it's fine. You guys would try to regulate me. I didn't choose to have a hotel. I think one gentleman mentioned he's paying hotel taxes. If you're paying hotel motel taxes, then you're a hotel motel. And I think the similar traffic and environment, it's not similar. Functionality the same as an accessory apartment. It's not. It's not a residence. It's not a. It's a short term. It's coming in and out. I don't know who it is. The house in my neighborhood, I run by it every day. My kids are there. We're riding bikes. I don't know who's there. So if you're going to look at it from a business point of view, though, which I think is really what the family that's brought the case wants you to, it's a business, and we have to look at it that way. It's gone, regulated. We heard also we haven't had complaints in 10 years. Well, they didn't exist 10 years ago. You didn't have Uber complaints. Things have changed. So we have to change with it. We have to figure out how to regulate it. We have to figure out how to make things work. We're not saying we're going to get rid of them. It's in neighborhoods that are supposed to be single-family homes. So I think that's just what we have to look at, that we have to figure out how to move forward with how things have changed. And that's all I have to say about it.
Thank you.
April, would you mind getting a couple of yellow cards and bringing them up here? I have an additional person that would like to speak.
Absolutely.
Mr. Menard, Kenneth Menard.
I didn't sign up to speak.
Okay. Jesse Bodway. Giselle Menard. After Ms. Menard will be, I believe that's Dozier Lester.
Good evening. Thank you for having me. My name is Giselle Menard. I live at 2018 West St. Mary Boulevard. I'm against the appeal. My husband and I own 3 short-term rentals on Evangeline Drive here in Lafayette. We used to live there. We also have other long-term rentals, but in this neighborhood, we decided that because we lived in the home in the front, that it would be better to regulate having the Airbnbs in the back because of a lot of factors, parking being a big issue because we only have 4 parking spaces. We did not want to overcrowd the street with cars. And normally, like someone said, if you have a 2-bedroom apartment in the back, you have a possibility of having at least 2 extra cars, possibly 3, depending on how many occupants. So we've always prided ourselves in being good landlords. In my opinion, if you're a slumlord, you're a slumlord. We have several properties, Section 8 properties, just a block from ours that have a constant police presence that I've called the cops on many times for possible drug dealing. There's never been a complaint on any of our properties. Like everyone else said, you're going to get kicked out if you're not producing a good product. As a long-term landlord, it took us months to get a lady out that was not, following the rules. So anyway, we have transitioned ours because of COVID. We've now transitioned to medical travelers, which are, I don't know how you define exactly, are they long or short term, but now we're hosting tons of frontline workers. I have a physical therapist in one of my units right now, and an RN in another unit, and a salesman from Florida in a third unit. The salesman came here because of the hurricane. He's still here doing work for our city. The other two are here because of COVID. So that, I would want to know if we're going to regulate this, how do we define short term? How many nights is it, where do you define that? Short to long? Is it a month, or because ours are a minimum of a month, usually up to 13 weeks. So I would just hope that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there's a lot of good reasons to have short-term rentals. The guy who came to us as the salesman had actually stayed in a hotel for months, and when he found out about ours, he was so excited because he finally had a quiet place to lay his head. The hotel experience, if you're here for more than a few months, is terrible. You have people coming and going, slamming doors. If you're a nurse and you're trying to sleep during the day when people are, there slamming doors, it's not fun. So anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you for listening.
Dozier Lester? Yes, sir. Next speaker will be Andrew Hill.
Good evening. Thank you all for your time. I didn't realize you were volunteers. I live at 319 Myrtle Place, 70506. I was on a board, president of the board of directors of a building in New York City for many years, and I don't envy you. But as I understand it, the purposes of this meeting is to determine whether the prior director's overturning a prior decision was correct. That's not the purpose. What's the purpose?
They're appealing the current director's decision.
But she overturned a prior director.
Okay.
Okay, so they're appealing the director's decision.
Yes.
Which she made singularly. And I am for the appeal. I don't see those 4 points that the gentleman pointed out earlier. I don't see how this for-profit business fits those 4 guidelines at all. It is not. I made some notes. It is not an accessory apartment. It's not on the same piece of property. I'm friends with the Basses. I am friends with Longlanays, Shefflers. I don't dislike Mike and Aaron, but we did buy a house in a single-family dwelling neighborhood. It's not an accessory apartment. How many, and I have to disagree with the prior director's decision, and we didn't have an opinion to voice our concerns. Most of the anecdotal stories you've heard so far tonight are from people that are against it. They own, they profit, they make money. It's purely selfish decisions. And here you have an appeal brought up by neighbors, no financial gain. They don't really, I don't think, wish hardship on the Basses, nor do I. It's caused a problem in our neighborhood. And so I hope you take that into consideration when y'all meet and make your determination later tonight. Thanks.
Andrew Hill at 117 Myrtle Place. I am for the appeal. As Gordon had said earlier, several of us got together. We were here to discuss some of these 4 points individually. Specifically, I am up here to discuss point 4, whether or not this is within the same industry classification as another permitted use, which I think we can maybe all agree is not. It is not. But before we even get there, I would suggest to all of the members present that it is disingenuous to say that this is not a defined use within the section, therefore allowing the director to make this decision on her own. Within 8921, lodging is a category that is defined in many different ways. You have a bed and breakfast, you have hotels, small hotels, you have hotel motels, recreational vehicle parks. All of these things fall within the category of lodging. If you are allowing someone to come and stay in your house for profit, who is paying you money and you are thereby paying hotel and motel tax, you are lodging that person within your house. That is defined within the code. And the only thing that is permitted in an RS1 neighborhood that falls under that category is a bed and breakfast, and it is only a conditional use. It is not a permitted use. So the idea that the director could make this decision on her own, to me, at the outset, is something that is incorrect. This should not have been done. To the specific point, number 4, the use is within the same industry classification as another permitted use. In making this determination, it says that the administrator may rely on the North American Industry Classification Manual, the NAICS system. Within that manual or that system, the only thing that Airbnb can fall under is accommodation, which is section 721. There are several codes within that section. They are traveler accommodations, hotels, except casino hotels and motels, not permitted in a residential neighborhood. Hotels and motels, not permitted in a residential neighborhood. Casino hotels, not permitted in a residential neighborhood. Other traveler accommodation. And bed and breakfast inns. Again, this is the only thing that has any ability to operate within a residential neighborhood, and it itself is only a conditional use. This is not blanketly permitted. So number 4, if the administrator was relying on number 4, and I find it curious that after hearing from Mr. McGoffin and the other lawyer from the city, and we had the director up here herself, we still don't know what she relied upon, which category it is she's claiming that this falls under, and how it was that it is permitted and what she relied upon in making that decision. Thank you for the time.
Peggy Voorhees. And after Peggy will be Colby Lang.
Good evening.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jill Kramer. Apologize. Jill Kramer.
Good evening, and thank you very much for your volunteer work. What you guys are doing is not easy. I'm glad I got to follow Andy because I'm going to talk a little bit about what he said. I am for this appeal. The director chose accessory apartment as her definition of what an Airbnb, B&B, standing for bed and breakfast, is under the LDC code. Of course, accessory apartment is permitted. It's permitted in every category in the LDC code except commercial mixed, commercial heavy, public institution, industrial light, and heavy industrial. It's probably one of the most permitted classifications in your LDC code. But if you go to a bed and breakfast in NAICS, you get establishments that provide short-term lodging in private homes. It's so clear, it's so clearly defined that it would have been the perfect thing to use to justify her decision, but it also required conditional permitting, and conditional permitting required notification to the neighbors. The neighbors needed to be notified by mail 10 days before for a public hearing. and signage need to be put out. Therefore, it wasn't used, or for some reason it wasn't used because none of us were ever notified of the change in classification of the short-term rental. That's a problem. It's a transparency problem. It's a trust problem. We need zoning to protect our neighborhoods. There are ways to do it. It's laid out. And we weren't given the opportunity to even know what was going on, were it not for the lawsuit. Now, interestingly enough, that does come under constitutional rights, and that does provide Boza an opportunity to overturn decision because we were not given due process as neighbors to the decisions that were made by the Director of Zoning. What I find most interesting, too, is that June 22nd, 2020, an internal memorandum was sent by the director, which recommended RS1 zoning district that short-term rentals had to be owner-occupied. That would also justify using a bed and breakfast classification for a short-term rental, Airbnb. Bed and breakfast. They use the term themselves in the description of their product. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
What was for the record, what was your address? Sorry, we missed it.
I'm sorry. I live at 602 Parkside Drive.
All right, thank you.
Jill Kramer. After Ms. Kramer will be John Pastor.
Okay, yes, Jill Kramer. I live at 117 Myrtle Place, and I am for the appeal. I'm here to talk about number 3 of Section 8921C. That other comparably sized jurisdictions have successfully integrated the use in one or more equivalent zoning districts. I don't think that could be a valid point for her to have used to justify this decision. First of all, I'll start with Abita Springs. Abita Springs has ordinances on short-term rentals. Currently, Lafayette has none. No ordinances whatsoever. One person may not hold more than one short-term rental permit. The permit's not transferable. They should not be operated outdoors or in recreational vehicles. The parking, minimum one parking site space shall be provided for per bedroom use. Vehicles shall not be parked on the street. Short-term use of the short-term rentals for commercial functions, ceremonies, and other special events shall be prohibited. That's an example. There shall be no more than 10 short-term rental permits issued by the town annually. So there's a waiting list if there's going to be more than that. Mandeville, very similar ordinances as well. In addition, property owners have to have $500,000 in liability insurance. There cannot be used for social events, cannot be used for commercial events, no parking on the street. Again, in Mandeville, it's also limited to 10 whole house rentals at any time per year. Short-term rentals are not transferable. They're required to, only the owner of the property can operate the short-term rental. So a renter can't then turn it around and start operating short-term rentals. Baton Rouge, as Mrs. Sheffler said earlier, is deadlocked. They're in the debate as we are. I have an article about that. I'm going to submit all this, offer file and introduce it into the record. Do y'all have exhibit numbers from prior, the documents that Mrs. Sheffler had exhibited? What's the last?
We'll just take it. We're including all of them in the file.
Jefferson Parish. Now that's the bigger one. Well, let me go back to this. Did any other comparably sized jurisdictions successfully integrate? So what is successful? All these places have had great difficulty trying to integrate this. It wasn't as simple as saying it's a permitted use with 0 regulations. All these have resulted in a lot of regulation. Jefferson Parish I don't think they don't allow, okay, short-term rental is prohibited in single-family residential zones, strictly prohibited. It's allowed in mixed zones, and then the residential zones, there's some kind of oh, darn. I was not ready. I'm not
Thank you.
finished. I would like to offer, file, and introduce all the
Just bring them
exhibits
over
that we
here, too.
have, as well as the entire short-term rental handbook from New Orleans. This needs to be considered, and it's definitely not successful.
I'll take that over here.
Just bring it up. Yes, sir.
Let's speed through this. John Pastor, I'm against. I live at 515 3rd Street, downtown, historic Sterling Grove neighborhood. I'm one of the founders of LTLA, a 501c3 Lafayette Travel and Lodging Association. Facts and figures and impact on tourism and economy and FIT travel. The impact of Airbnbs with over 300 units at 40% occupancy rate by AirDNA is 240 guests a day, 87,000 a year, spending on average of $80 to $100 a day, 8.5 million to 8.7 spending on local businesses. From LCVC, 3.5 million in direct sales to local hosts who spend their 3.5 million in revenue in our local economy, unlike Hilton or other hotel moguls. Let's don't forget about the $500,000 in direct tax sale revenue that the city does receive from Airbnb and pays to LCVC on that 13% add-on to build our local culture, heritage, and economy. I heard the word fear used a lot. I am married. I understand. I have children. I also have my home. It has multi-units in it. I have 6 guests that are there now. We were just talking. I was playing the accordion for them. To build your life on fear is to build a world that will crumble. Most of the complaints I've heard were about fights and parties. We can regulate that. That's what we do. He talked about the call that was about the fights and the parties. That was actually at the Nickerson house. I made that phone call. Those people were outrageous, and that was a commercial property, okay? I made the noise complaint as well. You can't lump all these things together, okay? People smoking cigarettes and looking at you, or fear of your children being looked at, that's just ridiculous. This is a world where people have children, you know, lives go on. If you remove Airbnb, you want to talk about fear, you're going to destroy the FIT market. You're going to destroy modern tourism and travel in the industry and the culture and our heritage. According to Smart Traveler and Southern Living, 70% of FIT travelers will not stay in Lafayette if they do not offer Airbnb. So you're going to lose 61,000 travelers that are couples, writers, musicians, photographers, and the people that build our heritage. So when our oil economy goes away, as it will again, because the new regulations that are happening, we're going to need to lean on tourism and travel to lure people in for our culture.